bear with me, we're not live yet. I'm just waiting confirmation.
No problem.
No problem. Yeah, we're now live.
Thank you, Jackie. Morning, everyone. Welcome to the virtual meeting of the Children and Young People Select Committee. The meeting is being webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. I'll begin by reading the names of the members on the committee so they can confirm their attendance for the public record. Members, please unmute and confirm your attendance when your name is called so we can ensure you can be heard. During the meeting, if a member wishes to speak, they will indicate this to me by raising their hand and I will call them to speak in turn. So firstly, we've got myself, Chairman Councillor Kirsty North, our Vice Chairman, Councillor Ray Bolton.
Present Chairman.
Councillor Jackie Branson.
Present Chairman.
Councillor Anne Briggs.
Present Chairman.
Councillor Zilia Brooks. I can see you.
I've had problems this morning. Oh,
I'll take that as a present. Councillor Fran Carpenter.
Present Chairman.
Councillor Peter Edgar.
Present Kirsty.
Thank you. Councillor Powell Hare.
Present Chairman.
Councillor Wayne Irish.
Present Chairman.
Councillor Gavin James.
Present.
Councillor Neville Penman.
Present.
Councillor Jackie Porter.
Present.
Councillor Robert Taylor.
Present.
Councillor Malcolm Wade.
Present Chairman.
Councillor Michael Westbrook.
Present Chairman.
And Councillor Bill Withers.
Present Chairman.
Thank you. Ian Brewerton, our Parent Governor Representative for Secondary Schools.
Oh, Chairman, he is trying to join. He was under his wife's account, so he should be joining shortly.
No problem. Gareth Davis, our Parent Governor Representative for Primary Schools.
Yeah, good morning, Present Chair.
Thank you. Kate Watson, our Parent Governor Representative for Special Schools.
Yeah.
Robert Sanders, our Church of England Diocese Representative.
Present Chair.
Thank you. We also welcome Councillor Patricia Stallard, the Executive Lead Member for Children's Services and Young People, and Councillor Ros Chad, the Executive Member for Education and Skills, to the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Chairman.
For clarity during the meeting, if the outcome of an item is to note the update, I will ask members to unmute and confirm verbally if they're happy to agree that outcome. For the two budget items, an electronic poll will be conducted that will display to committee members. Members, please indicate your vote by using the appropriate button and hitting submit. The Democratic Services officers will confirm the outcome of the poll for the record. And I can confirm that the coopted Parent Governor members are not eligible to vote on the budget items. I would like to remind members that the Constitution standing orders will apply. Please keep your microphone muted unless you've been called to speak, and that you may be visible on screen to the public and to other members even when you're not speaking. So we haven't had any apologies, so we can move on to declarations of interest, please. If anyone has any declarations for an item to be discussed today, if they can declare it now or at the beginning of that item. So we'll move to item 3, the minutes. Are minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of November 2020 agreed? If we've got any queries, could you raise them now, please? Otherwise, I'll take those as agreed. Thank you. Item 4 is deputations. We haven't had any deputations received today, so we can move straight to item 5, Chairman's announcements. I'd just like to thank all members of the committee for their input in this electoral term and for your hard work over the past few years. You'll recall at the September Select Committee, members agreed an additional recommendation in relation to the autism assessment services. And since the November Select Committee, we've received by email a copy of the letter from the Chief Executive of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight CCG Partnership, confirming details of funding for autism assessment services. We've also have a written report providing more information on this funding later on today's agenda. You'll also recall at the July Select Committee, members agreed an additional recommendation in relation to childcare sufficiency assessments and the COVID-19 impact and response for the childcare sector. We've received by email a copy of the letter from Vicky Ford, the Parliamentary Secretary of State for Children and Families, in relation to that. So that's all from me. We'll move straight to item 6, the 2021-22 Revenue Budget Report for Children's Services, a pre-scrutiny item before it's considered by the Executive Lead Member for Children's Services and Young People this afternoon. It's pages 15 to 36 in our pack, and we've got a presentation in ModGov as well. And I will hand straight over to Steve Crocker, our Director, to talk us through.
Good morning, members. And first thing, I'm just going to put onto our screens the presentation. So just bear with me 1 minute whilst I do the technical stuff. There we go. And hopefully, Kirsty, would you mind just giving me a thumbs up if you can see that presentation on your screen so that I know it's coming through?
I can indeed.
Excellent, thank you. Right, so first of all, Erica Meadus, our finance business partner, is going to walk you through the sort of context, both nationally and locally, things like the spending review, etc. And then I'll give you some service context about where we are, and then we'll sort of round up at the end, and then back over to you for debate and any questions. Okay, and we'll run through it at a fair pace because we've got a significant agenda today, but hopefully we'll give you enough detail here combined with the papers that you've got to ask us any questions that you need to. So at which point I'm going to hand over to Erica to kick off the first bit. Over to you, Erica.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning. So this shows the outline of the presentation. The first sections that I'll go through are the County Council context and the reserves position. We'll look at the local government finance settlement and the county and the Children's 2021 programmes. The final 2 points there are more children specific, so Steve will pick those up. And the first part of these slides are presented to all select committees as a standard. So moving to the County Council context.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I forgot I'm the glamorous assistant here, aren't I? Yeah. Yeah, there we go.
So most of you will recognise this diagram. It sums up the transformation programme dating back to 2008, which gives us a cumulative total savings of £560 million to April 21 for the county. There is an additional 80 million that has been agreed for the savings programme April 23. Just to note, of that 560, 122 million was children specific. So moving on. This sums up the medium-term financial strategy position. So this, as we've just seen on the previous slide, there's £80 million savings target for T21. That was agreed in the medium-term financial strategy in 2018, and the proposals for implementation of that target were all agreed in November 19. Savings plan anticipated some delivery outside of that 2-year programme, but that's been planned for within the medium-term financial strategy, but that was pre-COVID. Moving on. So then COVID came along. This has had a range of impacts across the county as well as in children's in terms of the cost of responding, any lost income, increased demand, as well as impacts on business rates and council tax. So the council's strategy was to deal with the impact of COVID as a one-off issue corporately to avoid any impact on service departments. The November Cabinet report has estimated some unfunded costs of £210 million over the medium term. And that report went on to highlight that we required additional government funding of £50 million to balance the budget. So this looks at the November spending review. We received, it was only for 1 year, which obviously makes it a bit trickier for our planning purposes. Then the provisional finance settlement was announced in December. Although that is provisional, they're not the final figures. We may not get those, possibly even until February. One thing it did provide for was a 4.99% increase in the council tax, which is 1% more than we'd anticipated. And that translates into £7 million for Hampshire County Council. So, there was additional money for social care, although again that was less than we'd anticipated. But there was good news on COVID funding, council tax support, and that the new homes bonus would continue for a further year, which we were uncertain about. So then moving on to the reserves position. Corporate reserves positions currently stands at 643 million, although over half of that is committed to existing revenue programmes and capital spend. Further allocations are made from that, which are detailed there, for trading accounts, insurance reserves, and the general fund balance, which leaves £111 million. The next slide details that £111 million. The majority of this is in the budget bridging reserve, but that is being used to cash flow the savings programmes and part of our COVID response corporately. And it does note there that 44 million of that will be drawn down in this financial year. So moving on to Transformations 21. The key point here is there are no additional savings within this budget round. As I mentioned before, the others were signed off before T21 for children's was a £17 million target. So the next slide, some of the T21 programme had longer lead-in times, and that has been cash flowed corporately, and part of cost of change and some corporate support. There is a high degree of confidence in delivery of that. However, we will be running that alongside the savings plan for 2023. The next slide breaks down the children's 17.2 million, which, as I said, was summarised before. The next slide shows not issues as such, but out of that 17.2, 14.5 is anticipated to be delivered. The shortfall has all been agreed and fed into the medium-term financial strategy, and this refers to transforming social care. We've agreed corporately that we'd split that for 6 months. And home to school transport, some of the resource has been diverted away from transformation, so that's all part of the plan. And that's it corporately, so I'll now hand over to Steve on departmental.
Thank you very much, Erica. So moving on then, and again, I'll do this at pace, and most of you will be familiar with this territory for us, but I'll just sort of give you the broader context in which we're operating in terms of the revenue budget. So as you all know, we've had a series of principles that we've tried to work to over the last, really over the last 7 or 8 years, but which we've refined as we've gone along. But they're familiar. We've not significantly altered them this year, but they're a touch point for us in terms of what we have to do. We've got some of the ongoing sort of context for us is that we've been high quality and low spending over many years now, and that's important for us. We know that particularly in terms of children's social care, but I think it also applies to education, that actually delivering high quality is better value and actually more economic in the long run. And what that does mean is that we haven't got very many places to go. There's not much fat on the organisation because we've been lean for a long time. Like every other authority in the country, we've had an increase in demand for our services, And like every other local authority in the country, there has been a sort of increase in the cost of services. So supply does not keep up with demand, or has not kept up with demand, and so price increases, particularly around placements, etc. We're on track with our savings plan, so that's really positive. But they're always overlapping, as we've described. We've also got emerging pressures in schools, more specifically around the high needs block, which is not quite schools, but we can talk about that if you need to. And there are national issues around social worker recruitment and retention and special educational needs pressures in terms of volume. We're not immune to those. Every authority is wrestling with those. And then on top of that particular wrestling match, we've got COVID as well. Just to give you some national data then, and I'll compare this to local, just to illustrate the national picture and where we fit that. So in the last 10 years, we've seen an 80% increase in child protection investigations, and nearly a 50% increase in child protection conferences. And when you compare that to the national figure, child protection plans have gone up 51%. So we're slightly below the national trend, but we're pretty much in line with it, to be honest. And basically what that's telling us is there's a lot more children that are perceived to be at risk, and there's a whole variety of reasons behind that, which we rehearsed in this committee previously, but happy to go back into that if we need to. Little slide here that just gives you an indication of the sources of those referrals, which organisations refer into us. You see 11.4% are from individuals, but the majority are from education and the police. That's where the main sort of points of reference in to us as an organisation are in terms of children's safeguarding. But it's quite, as you can see, it's quite spread across a number of other bits of the workforce. In terms of our transformation, just to rehearse a little bit of this, we've had a whole system change in place, which is looking at a family-based service, multidisciplinary, really focusing on interventions that make a difference, with flexibility built in and supporting the family and children in the community wherever possible. The reminder, this is what we heard back from Ofsted. We have to remind ourselves sometimes, because when you get stuck into the daily grind, it's important to remember that actually we're good at this stuff and we know what to do. What difference has that made? Really, really impressively, as we look at the introduction of our transformation programme, we see the rates of all of the key indicators start to come down in a positive way. So the red line reflects the reduction in numbers of children on child protection plans. The green line is a sort of is the number of open cases, but the denominator has changed so that it fits on the graph, but that's a realistic representation. And the blue line is the numbers of children looked after. So all of those were going really, really positively and in line with our transformation programme. And you'll all be wondering, well, why have they gone up again recently? And the answer to that, and if you look carefully at the date, it's about the end of March they start to go up. And what that reflected was an increase in sort of difficult casework and traumatic casework in some cases that we received in that period after the first lockdown, when families started to really struggle. You'll be pleased that this graph only goes up to September, and you just see it on one or two of the timelines that you see the graph beginning to flatten, and I can report that since September those graphs have been on a decline, which is good, which means that the numbers are coming down in all of those categories. But of course, we're now back into the position we were in March, and that will again have another impact. So we expect to see a sort of a more volatile position than otherwise. But the underlying trend, when we look at this, and we've analysed it really quite closely, the underlying trend continues to be downwards on all of the key metrics, and that's really, really positive for us, and it also ensures that we're on track with our T21 savings proposals. Just this puts that in numbers: 23% reduction in child protection plans, a 4% reduction in children looked after, and that's against a national increase over those 2 years of about 5% per year. So you can see that that's a massive difference when you start to compare against national, and a reduction in workloads and improved outcomes for children. That's the most important thing. The other area of pressure in the department is around special educational needs, and I don't think it's a surprise to any of you, given what we've talked about in this committee over the last few years, but there it is in graphic form about the increase in the number of children with education, health and care plans. My math isn't brilliant, but if you go back to really 2000 and again, I suppose over the same time period, but even if you go back as far as 2014, which was when these SEN reforms were introduced, we had 4,900 children with what was then a statement of special needs. We now have 10,487, so it's more than doubled. And there's no, surprise therefore as to why high needs block in schools block is under pressure, and why our SEN services are under pressure. The only way to deal with that is through national change to the SEN system. I've said it before and I'll say it again now. The reforms in 2014 were well intentioned, but they did not, the Department for Education, certainly the officials that I met with, did not seem to listen to the advice that we gave them about the impact that this would have on numbers, and we're now reaping that particular problem. So we've got, we have to ensure that we use that high needs block, what we've got, efficiently, tackle the rise in demand where we can, and cease plans where appropriate. But ultimately, this is going to be around a national solution. And again, I can tell you that every authority in the country is facing similar issues. I won't go through these next couple of slides in details, but they do give you some detail about the strategies that we're using to reduce expenditure on the high needs block over the last couple of years, and we can happily take questions on those, but they're a bit more detail on that. At which point, so that's it. So I'm going to hand back to Erica just to round us off on the overall budget.
Thanks, Steve. So this just summarises the movement in the budget split down between the schools and non-schools. So for schools, we've had the dedicated schools grant announcement, which did include the teachers' pay and pension allocation. Within non-schools, we have had increases in corporate support regarding children looked after and some inflation, but we have taken out the £17.2 million T21 saving, which reduces that non-schools. And the next slide just shows that then split. This is the non-schools broken down between the branches, and the final slide is the schools element broken down between the blocks. And that's it.
And there we go. And that's the end of the presentation. Obviously, we're very happy to take questions on that, and I've got other officers here, depending on the level of detail that you want in those questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Steve and Erica. Members, if you have a question, would you like to raise your hand and I will call you in turn? Let's have a look. Councillor Gavin James.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question going back to that 17.2 million on the presentation. The top line of that reduction is government funding 8.1 million. And I was just a bit confused. Does that mean that we've presented this as a saving because it's extra money coming from government, or what? I didn't quite understand how, or are we funding government and we've cut it by 8.1? I just don't understand how that figure arrives.
Yeah, I can answer that very quick. It's essentially it's income based on the social care, the ring-fence social care grant, which has continued and will continue under the spending review, and which You know, in conversation with the treasurer, we thought it was a prudent estimate of what would come in, and it turned out to be bang on, and we understand that will continue. So it's an income stream rather than a saving.
So in reality, then it's not 17.2 million savings; it's 9 million savings.
Correct.
Presented at 17.2 for reasons.
It's an accountancy thing.
Can only explain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Jackie Porter.
Thank you. Steve, you've talked many times about the cost of high needs block and the government potential for a revision to the way in which they fund it, or they react to the increased numbers. Have you got any indication of when they will come up with anything for this particular group? Because we're sitting with effectively a deficit reserve, aren't we, of over 34 million?
That's right. Yeah, so the government commissioned a review of the SEN reforms, and that review is led by a guy called Tony McArdle. That review was due to report in April and was postponed. I understand that, you know, they've done a lot of work on it, but I also understand why it was postponed, and we're now being told it will be later this year. My interpretation of why they have postponed it is because precisely the points that we're making is that the only way to resolve this is through both a system change and a financial change, and the financial change would therefore need to tie in with the spending review, the 3-year spending review. So my anticipation is that it will, as I say, be tied in with that spending review, which will be announced in November this year. Because in simple terms, what happened, but the process is now much more open. We have much less ability to gatekeep it, and therefore more people go through the gate. And the government has to consider whether they want to narrow the gate or not. And if they don't want to do that, then they have no choice but they have to put more money in. The other thing that members probably want to be aware of is that yes, we do have a deficit, but we are nowhere near the deficit of some other authorities. Some authorities have a deficit of over 100% of their high needs block, which, in other words, for us, that would be the equivalent of over £110 million. So we're not in that territory at all, and there are other authorities which are in the public domain with very much higher deficits on their high needs block. So we're sort of managing it in the best way that we can, but there has to be a national solution to this. It cannot be solved locally.
Councillor North, with your permission, can I just ask, the fact of the 3-year likely spending review, knowing how we've been having yearly ones for the last couple of years, the 3-yearly is not necessarily going to be the answer in November 21. So how do you think you can react to that if we will we just end up acquiring a larger deficit over the years, or would you expect to be finding other ways of working with this particular group?
Yeah, we keep doing what we're doing essentially, which is, and if in the presentation you'll see some of the measures we're taking to try to limit our expenditure, and that we try to cap the in-year deficit, if I can put it that way, as much as we can, so that the deficit doesn't grow. The other things that we're doing, we'll come on to a little bit in the capital report actually, but obviously as we've got increased demand, we're trying to build more school places, because it is cheaper for us to provide school places than to go to independent providers. That said, it's not no cost, because that still falls, although we can build it, the costs of the teachers still falls upon the high needs block. So that's the other bit that we're trying to do. And there are a couple of Austin Academy comes on stream this year, and Sam Cody next year, which are major, will have a major impact on this, we anticipate.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Fran Carpenter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, to Steve, you talk about these necessary reforms. You talked about the 2014 SEN what's the word, policy that came in.
Yep.
And I just wondered, how do you think the gate should be closed? I think it's really important for parents and schools and other agencies to actually understand how this works. And I don't think we can sort of say it loudly enough, really. I just wonder how you think we can close that gate a bit.
Okay, well, I'll give you an opinion, but it's purely my professional opinion, and it's not intended to be politicised at all. My view is that the 2014 Act was, as I said, was made with the best of intentions, and it was to ensure or try to ensure that more families got help within the special educational needs system. And my view is that that's fine, but if you wish those ends, you have to wish those means. So if that's what we want as a society, then I am behind that, because I obviously, although I have to look after the money and all the rest of it, children are at the heart of what we do, and if we can offer them better support, and in whether it's in special schools or maintained schools, then great. So at one level, in my heart, I'm sort of in favour of the SEN reforms in 2014, but they're not properly funded, and I think that's where this has fallen down. The second thing that sort of sits behind that would be a whole, we need to have a better public debate and a better sort of understanding of what is the best way for children with various forms of different special needs to be taught. And if you, when I always think, if you lined up 100 parents and said, do you want your child to be taught in mainstream, or do you want your child to be taught in special school? It would be sort of 50-50 really, and therein lies part of the debate. So I get lots of letters from some parents fighting to get their children to stay in a mainstream rather than in special, and vice versa. And so there's something about, how do we better evidence and create better and clearer pathways for those children, and how do we support mainstream schools to support those children in the long term, where that's the best thing to do. And then thirdly, how can we invest in the special school arena, as it were? There is, because demand has outstripped supply, there are a lot of independent special schools, and they charge increasing fees, etc. Their only client is the state. So and they charge us all lots of different amounts of money, and we need to have some sort of centralised oversight of that, in my view. And that is, I'm not talking about Hampshire, I'm talking about nationally, because it's a national market, not a local market, and that would also help to bring down some of the costs that we see. That's my opinion, but it's there's probably lots of underneath that, which I'm happy to pick up another time, but it's a bit more detailed, I suspect.
Thank you for that answer. Thank you.
Councillor Malcolm Wade.
Thank you, Chairman. Steve, I want to be careful how I articulate this question. Okay. As a lead-in, we've had 10 years of austerity, and during that time, the shape of children's services has changed quite dramatically. But you've had a fantastic Ofsted result, and I can't pay tribute enough to how well the organisation has been during that time, and that's clear. And I'm sure all members would agree with that. You've done an outstanding job. But you've got to plan for the future. No good organisation, and I count Hampshire Children's Services as a really excellent organisation, exists in the now. You're always planning for the future. Now you've got new ways of working, and you've met an increasing demand environment, and you've managed to keep on top of it. You've done looked at savings cuts, call it what you would call cuts here, but you've made change, and it's like the goose that laid the golden egg. But are we on the point of killing the goose because we're pushing it too far? What is your vision and it is a challenging question for the future, because demand is not going to reduce, and you can only do so much with little. And for the people, for the children and young people of Hampshire, how can we see the future in a positive light? Perhaps that's not the way to articulate. How do you see the future? What's your vision for how we will deal with the challenges going forward? Because we are at the 99th point. You know, there is no more room for manoeuvre. It needs an injection of more funding, without a shadow of a doubt, probably to tread water, let alone deal with any more increasing demands. And as even without COVID, we are discovering new issues, EHCP in the area of that, and in child protection. And COVID adds a whole new dimension to it. How are we going to survive in the future to deliver the service that I know you want to do, and I'm sure all members here want to do?
That's right, thanks. I think the thing that I would point to, and I referenced this in the presentation, but perhaps a bit lightly, was the touchstones that we have, and which are about, this is what we're about, and what we're about is ensuring a safe and effective social care system for children, that we've got enough capacity, leadership capacity, to challenge and improve the education system, and that we recognise that our workforce is our strength, that we tightly target those limited resources, we continue around early help, and we maximise the opportunity to create efficiencies through partnerships. Those are our touchstones, and those touchstones aren't changed. So, but what's important in this, I think, is that those touchstones are recognised and acknowledged by the leadership of the council, both politically, and I don't mean party politically, but across all of the politicians, recognise the importance of children's services, and also the corporate leadership of the council. And we've had really excellent financial support from the treasurers, and that I know that will continue, and it's absolute priority for the council. So, and the other thing I go back to is that that point about doing this well is frankly cheaper than doing this badly, and I think everybody really understands that as well, because the cost of failure in this regard is massive, and we know that from the other organisations that we look around and we see, and they're spending money hand over fist to bail them out of a problem. And again, that is well understood within the council's leadership. And I think the third thing that I would say in terms of where we go next is, I think we've done an awful lot on managing demand, and you saw some of those figures that I put up. We've had a reduction in children looked after, with a reduction in child protection plans, and I think that's finite. Don't get me wrong. You know, you can't. There's the point at which that doesn't deliver anything. But I think there's more to do on what you could crudely call the supply side, and there's an awful lot of, again, this is public, in the public domain, so I'm not saying anything out of turn, but there is a lot of profit in this sector, and I think we have to bear down on some of the profit to make future savings, and we will need some help from government to do that. Not necessarily Hampshire, but I'm talking about nationally, about how some of the systems and processes that are in place that don't help us and lead to excess profit are better organised. And the government is about to announce a care review, which will take us into that territory, I believe. And that announcement is on Friday. So that's probably that's probably the best answer I can give at this stage. But obviously, I mean, I'm sort of confident about where we're going with this, because we know that we're on the right track in terms of our frontline work and our work with schools, etc. So we've got to. Yes, I know there's more turbulence to come down the track, but I think we can steer a steady line through it.
Chairman, can I just come back on one point? That's a very good answer, Steve. Thank you for that. But you're on top of the things you can control, but you have not really said how you're going to deal with the things that you can't control, because you haven't got that pot of reserve. You haven't got anywhere to go, is what I'm trying to get at. We're at a finite position, and that's what worries me for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. It's the controlling the controllables, isn't it? So if we can control, if we can control what we control, then they're in a better place to manage the sort of the things that will buffet us. They're always think, and they inevitably are the things that we can't predict. It's the unknown unknowns, isn't it? And I sort of get your point, but I can only say that we're in as good a place as we can be in terms of being able to manage that in service terms, and also that we've had incredible support from the Treasurer in terms of managing any financial pressures that come up from time to time, and that's probably as far as I can go with that.
Thank you.
Councillor Michael Westbrook.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Steve. I just wanted to talk a bit about the pressure on children in care, obviously care leavers. The report talks about the percentage of care leavers who are unaccompanied asylum-seeking children at being at 25%. And I recall I think it was our last meeting, I think it was Stuart, talked about writing to government. And if I recall, he was going to talk, they were asking about how maybe some other authorities might take more of a burden, because obviously some authorities take more than others, and I think that's a very important pressure on us, a massive pressure on us, and I wondered if there was any outcome to that writing to government, that is.
Yeah, we did write to government and there is an outcome, but the outcome is that they're continuing as they are for the time being, which is on a voluntary scheme. What we were saying is that sorry, my phone's ringing in the background, but every authority, we were saying that it should be mandated that every scheme should, every authority should take children in turn from the border ports. That hasn't yet got enough agreement for the government to go forward with it, and so they're maintaining a voluntary scheme. So yeah, that's it really. I'm slightly disappointed in that outcome. I think that they will probably end up revisiting that, in my opinion.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Before I take Councillor Porter's second question, has any other member got a question that they wish to ask? Councillor Ray Bolton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. The additional 30 million that's proposed in the schools budget, am I right that that is driven by the government's funding formula in terms of increased numbers of pupils and the need to build new schools, and hence the revenue budgets for new schools in development areas?
It's a little bit of a number of things. So essentially there's the national funding formula, which increased the minimum level of funding per pupil. There is also a bit of extra high needs block in there as well, but it doesn't really touch the sides in terms of the overall amount. And there are a few other bits and pieces, but essentially it's a formula tweak that gives us a bit more money. And that announcement was made, correct me if I'm wrong, Erica, but I think it was made last year and actually has 3 years on it. So we know there's a bit more to come in next year and the year after. There's a dimension around that, which is around teacher pay as well, which is a bit more technical. But in essence, that's the answer is it's the national funding formula.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, we'll go back to Councillor Jackie Porter then, please.
Thank you. Councillor Westbrook asked my question about unaccompanied asylum-seeking families. I think that is putting a huge pressure on the revenue budget, and we appreciate that that's something really that we have as a council agreed to be sympathetic to that cohort of people, and I would endorse that we always do, but it makes it very, very difficult, doesn't it, for the budget. But the second point I was going to bring was, in fact, the one that you just touched on, Steve, as you finished that last sentence, which was the complication in schools at the moment, certainly in maintained schools, is the two major expenditure changes are keeping staff that are experienced, not necessarily well, they're not necessarily older, but they are experienced in schools and still maintaining a balanced budget. That's a challenge for schools. So that's one aspect of it. And the other one is about IT. And I think the pandemic has certainly shown how important it is for schools to have the IT capability. And I wondered if there is any difference between what we can offer to our own schools and what academies can achieve, and also what pressures those points place on us to manage our maintained schools long term, and whether we should be pressing for additional funding for precisely those two areas.
Okay, I may bring Brian and or Erica into some of those in a minute, but in terms of pressures on schools, there is still, don't forget, a cumulative surplus balance for school budgets in Hampshire of about, off the top of my head, about 40 million, I think. But it's unevenly spread.
That's the problem.
And that is part of the problem. And the way that the national funding formula works, and we don't really have any choice about shifting in that direction, is that it tends to because the emphasis is on pupil numbers, it tends to favour larger schools, and not exactly. It is not. Yeah, it doesn't always work like that, but generally speaking, it tends to favour larger schools. And where we're seeing schools struggling a bit, they tend to be schools that have either become less popular for whatever reason, or the areas are less populated and they're smaller schools. And those are the things we probably are wrestling most with at the moment. In terms of teacher retention and recruitment, I mean, I'll bring Brian in on that one at the moment. It doesn't feel radically different at the moment to how it ever has been, if you see what I mean, but it's always a challenge for us. Academies, sort of, we don't get access to academy sort of budgets, actually, so it's a little bit opaque about whether they're faring better or not. My sense is not. But again, Brian might have a bit more intelligence on that. And finally, on the IT question, it really is. It does, and again, it's. I mean, you're right. It's COVID has thrown up some interesting lights on it, and it does really depend upon the particular school, their particular environment, how much they've invested in IT over the years, what sort of IT, and it is a local decision about that, about what they've done. And clearly some schools and again, it's about capacity, larger schools have got tended to use, I don't know, Google Schools or whatever, stuff like that, have tended to be able to fare a bit better on the whole online teaching, whereas smaller schools, if you've got small village schools, you're not really set up to do lots of web-based teaching. So it is as variable as the variability of schools that we've got. Brian, I can see Brian switched his mic. Could I just let Brian? Can I let Brian come in to round it out a bit, and then perhaps if you want to come back. Okay, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, the only bits I'd add to that, Steve, and you're right, the funding formula, because it's based on pupils, shifting funding from smaller schools to larger. The other interesting bit in Hampshire is collectively Schools Forum. So all the schools in Hampshire collectively had created a funding formula that really skewed money towards area of disadvantage. So the Rushmores, Lee Park, bits of Gosport, so that it skewed money towards those. When the government set up the national funding formula, they also skewed towards areas of disadvantage, but not to the same extent that Hampshire had historically. Therefore, as we go towards the new national funding formula, money is coming out of areas of disadvantage to areas of advantage as well. It's just one of the kind of quirks of the system because of where we position ourselves as a county historically. The teacher recruitment, I think Steve's bang on right on that. I don't think there's much change over the last few years at all, Jackie. If anything, I'd say there's probably less movement between schools, particularly since last March when the first lockdown came. Why would you apply for the jobs and look to move school at the moment? It feels like staffing is very stable. And the bit on the academies, basically academies are funded in exactly the same way as the maintained schools. They apply that local authority's funding formula to that academy, so they get exactly the same money. So what I think you see is, in just the same way as we have some maintained schools that are better at managing the money than others, so you do with academies as well. And there are examples nationally where academy chains have gone bust and they've had to be rebrokered to other academies chains as well. So I don't think it's any more sophisticated and better than the maintained sector at providing some sort of financial stability.
I'm not suggesting they are. My question really was, you've often quoted they're their children, but they're their schools, but they're Hampshire children, which I think is a really important part of how we feel as a council. But about equality of access, because we can start to see that change for small schools and larger schools, successful schools and less successful schools. And I wonder what influence the Schools Forum would have on that equality of access.
But I don't think the equality of access is between academies and maintained. I think
No,
actually what you said is
that was related to the IT particularly.
Oh, right, okay. Well, actually, the Schools Forum doesn't have a lot. I mean, the truth is that increasingly that we have to move towards the national funding formula. The truth is that the influence of Schools Forum is limited.
Okay, thank you.
Jackie, can I just check, are you talking about equality of access to IT equipment during COVID with that question?
No, generally, long term, it often a pandemic or a crisis brings about an improvement long term, doesn't it? We realise what's needed and what's necessary, and we're hearing that different schools have got different access and different children have got different access. And so the point that Steve was making, and you were making, which is it's slightly geared the funding in a slightly different way. It's just sending it in the slightly wrong way. And we need to be considerate. I mean, going back to the point of us as a county and knowing that strong small p political support for the ethics of the county about making sure our most vulnerable children get that help. The curve is beginning to go the wrong way, and I wonder what we could do to rebalance that.
That's an interesting question. I would say that some of our schools in our areas of most disadvantage have got some of the best remote teaching at the moment, Jack. I'm not sure it's necessarily related to
encouraging.
The other interesting bit, just to kind of throw it in there, there's just been a parental survey done as to what are the major barriers to your child doing remote learning. Number one is access to printing facilities. Number two is lack of a suitable space in the home as well. So there are other factors other than just getting a device and a bit of connectivity out there. It's a much broader question. And the last point I'd make is the ability of schools to adapt also changes week on week at the moment, as they've got staff that are having to self-isolate because they've got COVID or because they've been in contact with somebody else. We've also got a bit of a shift in sands with the staffing complement available to deliver some of the teaching as well, which makes it tricky.
So you're basically saying that actually that curve doesn't necessarily change because of the funding change, so that disadvantage.
I'm not going to go as far as to saying I wouldn't welcome more money in areas of disadvantage to get the kids better equipment. You won't get me saying that one ever, Jackie.
No, I know. No, but I think the point I'm making really is that concerned that it's okay for 1 or 2 years because you can start to see this change in the fair funding formula. But as the time goes on, it will mean that certain schools will struggle in comparison to other schools.
Yeah, I think particularly Steve's bit around the size is the bit I would, and you'll know the sizes of the different secondary schools we've got around the county. There are some that we are concerned about, and some of those are academies, some are maintained.
Okay, thank you.
Final question from Councillor Jackie Branson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The thing I wanted to return to was the special educational needs, and what doesn't seem to come into the funding was the sort of number of children of special educational needs in a certain school. So if one school seems to have a lot more SEN children, it doesn't seem to cater for that, and it means so much extra demands on the budget, which isn't really funded.
Well, we could debate this one for quite a long time. Arguably, so every school has an amount from which children with, let's call them, this is wrong description, but let's call it lower level special educational needs, that should be funded within the mainstream funding that schools get. Arguably, part of the increase in education, health and care plans is driven by the fact that schools need more funding to meet their needs, and so they push for an EHC rather than because that gives them more money. And I can completely understand where they're coming from on that. Now, this is where the national review has to get into this. This is a national process thing. Is there a way in which you can actually just devolve that money to schools with an expectation that they manage the demand within their school and within their community? And that's where the review has got to go, in my view, because we've got baked into the current SEN system, you've got all sorts of perverse incentives, and that's why it's not working. Yes, you're right, but what you're describing is a national system, and I can't change that. No. So and that's why we need the national SEN review. There's an even more complicated version of that answer underneath, but it would take me a lot longer than I could afford at this meeting to explain.
That's right. And we all know that the funding for an EHCP doesn't always cover the cost of the child. And then if we've got a number of children with EHCPs, the cost is just, to the school is, beyond really what the budget can cope with.
Arguably, although I can point to the obverse of that equation as well on occasions.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. Is anyone wishing to say anything under debate? In which case we can move to the recommendation. Officers will be populating a poll, which I believe will have the recommendation on it, but it is at page 15 in your agenda pack.
Thank you. If you bear with me, I will try and launch the electronic poll, which should be then visible to members if all officers or anyone observing or the co-opted parent governors, please don't vote in this poll. I will launch this now.
Thank you, Jackie.
And if you can indicate if you're for, against, or you abstain with the recommendations to the executive lead member. Has that all popped up for members? It might be in your chat, members, if it's not on the middle of your screen. I've got 10 votes so far. Has anyone else not voted?
Peter Edgar, I can't get mine up today.
Oh, okay, Councillor Edgar, how are you voting? And I'll make a note of that. In favour. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, just bear with me. So we have 16 votes, and the majority of members have voted for the recommendations, so that vote is carried.
Thank you very much, Jackie. We can move straight on to item 7, which is the Children's Services Capital Programme 21 to 22 to 23 to 24. Another pre-scrutiny item before consideration for the Executive Lead Member for Children's Services and Young People in her decision day this afternoon. It's pages 37 to 107 in your pack, and we've got a presentation as well. And I believe, Steve, we're going to Peter Colnut.
Yep, I'll hand straight over to Pete, who will deliver this presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, members. I trust you're well. I'll just try and share the presentation with you now. If you could confirm, Chairman, when that's on the screen to me, that would be helpful.
Yep, I can see that now. Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, so this is a presentation. It's a high-level briefing of the key areas of the capital programme report that will be going to the decision day this afternoon. The report continues our significant investment across the school estate, and the recommendation from the decision day this afternoon will go through to County Council on the 25th of February. The national funding policy continues, as we've talked about at previous meetings, in terms of funding policy for school places and capital maintenance. That's fixing the roofs and windows, so to speak. But the statutory responsibility for the planning of school places remains irrespective of school governance. So picking up on the point just made in the last discussion, they're all Hampshire children, and the report in front of you today covers not only LA maintained schools, but also free schools and academies. To put this into a bit of context about where we've been and what we've been doing, 2013 to 2020, you'll see we've provided an additional 13,690 school places, with the proposals in the report in front of you today added an additional 4,600 places, making the total places to be delivered by 2024 to 18,300. The potential basic need projects listed relating to those school places are shown in table 11 of the report. And where appropriate, and as you'd expect, we seek to align any of the capital maintenance works that are managed by P&R committee against any basic needs schemes. So working closely with Steve Clow and CCBS, we seek to pull all of those projects together. We attach a school places plan, which gives a snapshot of the school places pressures and surpluses for the 5-year period at Appendix 6 of the report, but important to stress that that is only and can only be a snapshot at a point in time. So we'll continually be being updated as we get further intelligence from local planning authorities, particularly about new housing. And the timing of any of the proposals within that report will undoubtedly change. You will have heard me say time after time that housing developers never quite build to the time frame that they originally suggest they're going to. And part of that bears out in some of the next two graphs that I'll show. So what we see as we look at this table, so we've got primary numbers here, movement to secondary at year 7. We can see that we continue to see an upturn on the blue line, which is showing you an increase in the pressure on primary school places, a little bit of a dip in secondary. That's following the trajectory of the primary line, but will pick up as we roll further past 2025. So what we've seen in terms of the demographics is that growth continues, but the significant increase in births that we were seeing has begun to decelerate. And the pressure going forward, as we see it, relates more to new housing developments. But there is a significant upturn in the forecast numbers as we move forward post 2024. And some 7 new primary schools actually identified to be built around the 2025 period. And the report references in paragraph 28 a significant carry forward of resources, and those resources are carried forward to meet that future demand. This slide really gives you a bit of a flavour for some of the challenges in terms of the forecasting that needs to be undertaken. And what we're showing here is the position that we were looking at in 2010, which is the green line, 2014, the blue line, And what's actually now transpiring to happen is the red line here, and it's showing that that growth is pushed out over a longer period of time. So this is table 4 of the report, and this shows the planned new schools in Hampshire through to 2025. Our first free school opened in September 19, which was Borley Park Primary School in Botley. I'm really delighted to say that through the really hard work of the teams and the contractors, that Barton Farm in Winchester and Stoneham Park in Eastleigh opened as planned for September 2020, having obviously gone through the challenges of the 2020 COVID position. So those schools opened on time and greeted those new Year R children, so exciting. Austin Academy is another new special school that you're aware of, opens in Easter 21, and also the major new secondary school, Deer Park School in Hedge End, which is a 7th form entry school, is currently on site and due to open for September 2021. I stress, as I've just mentioned on the school places plan, that those schools that are those new schools that are showing post 2024 and onwards are subject to change as we monitor the housing developments. In terms of the discussion that's just taken place, obviously the increase in numbers does impact on SEND. Steve referenced the new Austin Academy School. There it is, sat in that image. So really excited to see that new school complete. It opens at Easter 2021 and will provide an additional 125 ASD places. We're continuing within the programme to allocate £1 million worth of resources per annum to add into SEND. And we've also got 2 significant projects, again referred to by Steve, the 90 additional SEMH places, which will be proposed to be provided elsewhere on the agenda this afternoon at Samuel Cody School, and the significant refurbishment of Icknield School in Andover for SLD and complex needs. And those 2 schemes alone are valued at circa £15 million, so a significant investment in SEND there. So in terms of the priority investment areas that are identified within this report, I've talked about school places, we've talked about maintenance and SEN. I'm also pleased to say that through additional Hampshire local resources that have been added into the programme, we've got £3 million for early years over the next 3 years. That's to address sufficiency and condition issues. When I say condition, I mean structural condition as opposed to decks and such like. And also, again, local resources of some £5 million has been made available to support suitability challenges in schools. So that's where we've identified areas of work which go beyond schools devolved formula capital allocations. Phase 1 of that works have already taken place and been delivered, with improving lighting. Phase 2 of that funding was used to address SEND projects they've been previously reported. And for you today, phase 3 of the proposals address science laboratories, food tech, refurbishments and toilets in primary and secondary schools. And those are shown at Appendix 7 of the report and are costed at £2.4 million. The next slide gives a high-level breakdown of the programme. It's fair to say that this number, 109 million, significant investment still, but it's lower than we presented in previous years. And that's largely because of the slip in housing. So the main focus of our investment, as you see, goes to new schools and extensions, and we'll see a significant upturn as we roll forward in the future years of the programme. Also to be noted that we now take out schools capital allocation and PSPB schemes. Those go directly to policy and resources. And also these figures exclude the fantastic decarbonisation fund news that I know Steve Clow presented to members last week, which talked around about the sort of £30 million worth of additional resources to support replacement windows in our SCOLA system buildings, solar panels on school roofs and corporate buildings, and also some boiler control improvements. Chairman, this slide refers to the school's devolved formula capital allocation. You'll see that we flagged this as assumed because the figures have yet to be announced. But to give you some flavour and size, a 2FE school will receive around about £9,000 worth of devolved formula capital, and a 1,000-place secondary school would receive around about £20,000. And again, these capital allocations come under significant pressure from individual schools. But again, referencing the last discussion, this funding can be used for IT equipment should schools so prioritise. This slide, Chairman, refers to some of the pressures on the programme. So what we are experiencing is that the UK construction industry has performed well, but has experienced a drop in confidence through lower orders, COVID, and also EU exit, and that equates to risk. And what we do see in our tender returns that are heavily influenced by risk, you start to see some creeping inflation. But I'm confirmed to say to members that each of the projects within the programme do contain a project contingency that we've worked with the industry to understand what we think that risk might be. But the 5-year programme, so the 3-year programme is fully funded. The 5-year programme does show that we fall into a small deficit that's outside the scope of this paper. But as usual, we'll work hard to try and minimise that deficit. And one way of dealing with that is to look at developer contributions. And again, to give you a feel for those numbers, 2013 to 2020, we would have brought in and negotiated £164 million worth of additional resources to support our capital programme across Hampshire schools. There's other opportunities to be explored to mitigate some of the funding challenges, such as free schools. And also, as we pick up on this slide, which is about delivering better school buildings. So we will maintain our national reputation for the quality of school buildings that we deliver, but we have been delivering better value schools over recent years. We'll strive to reduce costs further where we can. Some of that's coming about through standardised design and working closer with the industry. Using the experience that we've got from the benchmarking report, that's a national exercise. It's a national report that we undertake in conjunction with the DFE and Cabinet Office, and that is now valued at some £5 billion. So we've got £5 billion worth of national school data and costs within that exercise, which helps us also to drill down and understand where and how better value buildings can be delivered. The important point to stress on this slide is that it has minimal impact on the quality and the learning environment. So we always absolutely keep the learning environment as key in terms of our new school buildings. Chairman, I referenced the list of schools coming to the end of the presentation. Now I listed the schools at table 11 in the report. They're shown there. And again, reference the point that dates are subject to change. Appendix 3 of the report references the new modular classroom. So that's where we put down these type buildings where we're managing a bulge or a sudden urgent pressure on school places. And then the recommendation, Chairman, is that select committees support the recommendations being proposed to the Executive Lead Member for Children Services and Young People in section 1 of the Capital Programme report. And I'll seek to answer my best to answer any questions. Thank you, Chairman. I'll stop presenting this now. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. If members would like to indicate if they have a question by raising their hand, I will take those in turn. Councillor Michael Westbrook, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thanks very much, Peter. I did have a question about the report where it talks about the free school programme is under review. And I wonder if we know more about the outcome of when we know more about that, and when will the outcome be, and also with what the idea of the government's thinking is on that.
Thank you, Michael. We are in regular working and contact with the DfE, as I've talked about at previous times. We don't know actually as we sit today what the next Free Schools programme will be, but there is an expectation for more and that capital announcements in terms of the funding that we've yet to hear of for the next financial year, and also about the Free Schools programme in the spring and onwards. So we sit closely with the DfE to understand that, and we'll update members as soon as we've got more intelligence on that.
Thank you.
Councillor Jackie Porter.
Thank you. It was fantastic news to hear from Steve Clow the other day about maintenance of buildings. He could hardly contain his excitement, and actually nor could we, I think, which is really great. Really good start to the new year. But long term, are we expecting to build our schools as carbon neutral schools so that we don't have to do this sort of work to buildings long term? And if not, what's the barrier to that?
So thank you, good question. And we are looking at, and we're trying to develop new schools design as we move forward into the future to take on board and produce more efficient buildings. There is always the challenge about funding, and a lot of the negotiations that we're currently in with developers start many years before the actual buildings are delivered on site. So some of those negotiations that we're currently undertaken will be for buildings that will be delivered in 2025, 26, 27, and funding will be negotiated as the position today. The DfE are doing a lot of work at the moment on looking at carbon neutral buildings, and we're working alongside them to understand how best we deliver that and what that actually entails. So it's absolutely something, Jackie, on the agenda. Have we a design as we sit today for a carbon neutral school? No, we don't, but we are working alongside the professional bodies, the industry and the DfE to look at that going forward.
And basically bearing in mind there's often a performance issue, carbon neutral compared to delivery. And actually it's carbon negative really, isn't it, really, that we want to achieve?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Councillor Malcolm Wade, please.
Thank you, Sharon. Hi, Peter. Thank you for that good presentation. Can I ask you a question about school placement and plans? On page 100 in the report, we talk about, and I'm going to be parochial, so forgive me for this, Dibden and the Waterside. And the figures show up to 2025 that we have some excess capacity both at primary and secondary level. Now, there's a big development coming in Fawley of 1,300 homes, and of course, and I forgot the one in Marchwood. That's over 2,000 new properties, so there is going to be new housing in there. You say on page, I'm just getting the actual page, that there needs to be a discussion with discussions to take place with local primary head teachers about surplus places in Dibden and the Waterside. What does that mean when further down there is plans to build another primary school in 2026, obviously to help with the extra capacity? Just like an explanation, what does that discussions mean? Because beyond 2025, we probably will not have such surplus that we're experiencing at the moment. I just wonder what that means, that's all. Is that okay?
Absolutely fair question. And basically what we're saying here is that we're in negotiation with the developer to reserve land and a site for a new school. But what we need to understand as we go forward about what as and when the timing comes into place and when the school is actually required as a result of the housing being delivered, what is the position with the existing schools, and could there be other opportunities? So we don't always build new schools for new developments, as you know. Sometimes we'll expand existing schools or can be more creative with other school organisation proposals. So what we're basically saying there, we're keeping our options open just to ensure that we can flex and react in the best way once we know exactly the timescale of the development. One of the challenges with that specific development is we're unclear as we sit today how many of the dwellings will relate to family dwellings, and how many of the dwellings may be of a different type and nature that might not warrant the need for new school provision. So we want to keep the flexibility there with the developer to have the option for a new school, or potentially to deal something with the existing school estate.
I get that. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Robert Sanders, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your report, Peter. Just a question about the devolved formula capital that schools receive. My understanding is that schools can accumulate that over a period of 3 years, but there's like a 3-year window, and if the grant's not spent, then that's potentially clawed back. I just wondered if there's evidence that that is well managed by schools, and is there ever much funding across the county that is clawed back and therefore potential investment wasted? What's the landscape like in terms of the DFC?
Thank you, Rob. We haven't clawed back any of the devolved formula capital funding. It's not a dissimilar position to how Brian and Steve talked about school revenue budgets. It's a pretty mixed economy across the schools. Some have fairly significant reserves and others don't. Those schools that have a more significant reserve tend to be saving up for a capital scheme. So what we tend to find, so we do challenge them obviously about it, and whenever we're undertaking any capital works ourselves, we'll seek to understand a school's capital position. But often, as I say, if they're accumulating money, it's for a designated scheme that they're trying to undertake.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions, members? Any debate? In which case, Jackie, I'll ask for the poll to be populated. The recommendation is on page 37 of your agenda pack, members, and it will pop up shortly.
Thank you, members. If you just bear with me whilst I get to grips with this technology, and I'll launch the poll now, just to let you know that this will be excludes the co-opted members of the committee from voting.
Thank you, Jackie.
Okay, so the poll should be popping up now, and it's for the select committee to support the recommendations being proposed to executive lead member for children's services and young people in relation to the capital programme. As I think I'm still waiting for a few votes. Councillor Edgar, are you able to vote, or do you want to verbalise your
confusion between? Yeah, I'm in favour. Thank you.
Thank you. I can confirm that members are in support of the recommendations being proposed to executive lead member.
Thank you very much, Jackie. With that, we can move to item 8, the attainment of children and young people in Hampshire Schools 2020, an update item for your information, members. The report's on page 109 to 116 in your pack. And I think, Steve, would you like to introduce David?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just introduce it because it's, in some respect, it's sort of counterintuitive in that everybody knows we didn't have GCSEs last summer or A-levels or, SATs. But for as long as I can remember, we've brought a paper to this committee at around this time of year to reflect upon and highlight what's happening in Hampshire schools. And we, took the view that probably needed to, notwithstanding the fact that haven't got the hard data that we've called upon in previous years, that we should bring something that marked what had happened in the last year in Hampshire. And I'm even more content that we've done that, given the, since we drafted this report, or during the drafting of this report, there's been another announcement about this year's position. So I do think it's the right thing for us to do, albeit that it can't be the same as previous years in terms of comparability and so forth. Anyway, without further ado, I'll hand over to David, who's just going to walk you through. I think David's probably got us a couple of slides that he wants to show to just illustrate it. And we're happy to take any questions, obviously.
Good morning, everybody. I'm hoping I'm sharing some content there.
You are, but you're not sharing the presentation yet.
David, you're now on the presentation, but it would be helpful if you can put it on full yes, presentation mode, so that we can see it more fully on our screen. Thank you. Perfect.
Okay. So just to pick up on Steve's point, tricky times in schools with the cancellation of Key Stage 2, GCSEs and A levels. What we've got is a situation where there is no national data produced by the DFE. We're in a position where Ofsted, when they get back to the full inspection of schools, presumably sometime maybe later this year, that they will not be drawing on the 2020 assessments in any shape or form. If you try and have a conversation with an Ofsted inspector about exam results in 2020, they're not interested. They just shut it down. However, there are a number of issues that I think are worth discussing around this, particularly given where I think we've got to now. So March last year, really overnight, schools were shut and not given any notice of this. The GCSEs were cancelled, literally overnight. And basically Ofqual were tasked with coming up with a process to award children GCSE grades to enable them to access whatever it was they had lined up to access at post-16. And that's a real kind of challenge. I know there's been a lot of press debate about it, but it is a real challenge because the DFE were very clear that any grading that happened basically had to be on the basis of the work that children had done up to March. It was not about giving them additional things to do in the period March to July. It was on the work that they had done. It really needed to be fair. It really needed to be an accurate and robust process. And I think that's a real set of challenges for schools and for Ofqual. And Ofqual decided that what they were going to do was draw on two sources of information to award grades. There's been a lot of conversation about the algorithm, particularly in relation to A levels. But part of Ofqual's thinking was to say, in this country, we've got a massive data about children's prior performance at Key Stage 2. It is used very successfully to predict the overall performance of secondary schools. And so there was some thinking that this Key Stage 2 data could be used in conjunction with teacher assessment to come up with a grade. But there are some real challenges around that. And this table is basically shows for those children who in the Key Stage 2 got an average of a 4B in reading and mathematics, the grades they then went on to get in various different GCSE subjects. So if you just look at that line, art and design, it's saying that of just the 4B children, 3% of them got a grade 1, 9% got a grade 2, 20% got a grade 3, 22% got a grade 4, 21% got a grade 5. So that's setting out how those kind of children had performed in art back in the 2019 GCSEs. So if you're going to try and apply that into the 2020 GCSEs, there's a real challenge, because if you just take that group of children who got a 4B, you've got no way of deciding really what grade they would have got at GCSE. It's not like there's one grade which is more favoured than any other. What that data is saying is that group of children basically between grade 3, 4 and 5, there's no difference. There's an equal chance that you could have got any of those grades. And if you start to look down through those different subjects that I've quoted there, you can see the only thing you can probably say with any certainty is that if you got an average of grade 4 at Key Stage 2, you would not have got a grade 8 or 9 in mathematics. So the algorithm was always going to be a really tricky thing to do, to use children's prior attainment and all the history that there is around data to try and come up with a grade that children would have got at GCSE. Individual children is just too hard. So the idea was to use kind of teacher assessment, teachers' views, to kind of moderate that, and really kind of through teacher assessment and the combination of the algorithm, children would end up with a grade which kind of truly reflected their kind of work to date. Obviously, what happened was that the algorithm got into such difficulty at A level that the DFE said, well, what we will do with schools is basically award children the higher of the algorithm or the teacher assessed grade. So there are issues with the algorithm. There are also significant issues with teacher assessment. It sounds an easy thing to do, doesn't it? That teachers know best. Teachers can really get a good sense of how children can perform. But obviously, what this means is that if I'm a chemistry teacher in one school in Hampshire and there's a chemistry teacher in a school in Swindon, when I say this child in Hampshire, this is grade 4 work, that actually has to be comparable with grade 4 work in Swindon. And this need to have a consistent and accurate understanding of grades across a subject team in your school, across schools nationally, it really has to underpin any reliable teacher assessment process. And what there wasn't last year was really an attempt to set up a kind of national checking process to make sure that there was that level of reliability. And my big concern about that, and I say my big concern, the big concern about that is this thing that I refer to in the report as unconscious bias. Because when you get children who, particularly on those sort of grade boundaries, and you might have to make a decision as a teacher about, well, is this grade 4 or is this grade 5? I'm looking at their work. It's not kind of categoric. It's not an easy call. How is it that you end up making that decision? And my kind of worry is the way that kind of unconsciously things can kind of creep into that decision, which maybe aren't the right sort of things that should be used to judge children's performance. It is that bit where, you know, and there is research that kind of indicates sometimes children's kind of attitudes or orientation towards the school or the subject can sort of trip those decisions kind of one way or the other, you know, and in terms of children who might be kind of more positively attuned to the subject or the school or you know, even the teacher may be more likely to be given, if you like, the benefit of the doubt. And I was kind of, you know, the great concern around that was the way that unconscious bias might play out in teacher assessment, given how things had been arranged, with a particular view around disadvantaged pupils. Because not to be too overly stereotypical, if there was one group of children who might not be as well kind of orientated towards school, it could well be disadvantaged pupils. So there was a significant amount of conversation nationally about whether this teacher assessment process would potentially you know, disadvantage pupils further. So we went to schools in Hampshire, secondary schools in Hampshire, and asked them basically to report that data back to us, which we pulled together, and I've summarised that in the table. And the piece of data that we particularly interested in is that measure attainment 8, which is kind of, it's the thing we kind of talk about annually. It's that performance across 8 subjects, and you'll remember from previous conversations that there's you know, a definition around that. It's not 8 any old subjects, but there is a kind of tightly defined set of subjects, and attainment 8 basically gives you, in a sense, a measure of children's kind of average grade. So back in 2019, you can see that there was a gap of about 13 points between all pupils and disadvantaged pupils. And I think my fear was that when we moved to 2020, what we might have seen was that gap increase. The bit that I'm just really pleased about and heartened about is when we pulled the data in from schools to actually find that gap had narrowed. So we're in a position in Hampshire where the move to teacher assessment did not disadvantage pupils further. Actually, what they have done is they have achieved better as a result. So I think that's an event of some significance. And one of the things we have kind of been talking to schools about is reflecting on why that might be. Why is it that if you remove exams, then why is it that some disadvantaged pupils have done better? What is that down to? Because if you can understand that, that's something helpful for supporting a group of disadvantaged pupils kind of for the future. And the other thing that we've asked schools to reflect on is the bit around, so, you know, when you do remove exams, disadvantaged pupils still do not perform as strongly as kind of their more advantaged peers. So what is that down to? You know, so sometimes schools will talk about part of the issue around disadvantaged children is they find the pressure of exams significant, that there are some real demands around literacy, they struggle sometimes to comprehend the questions, Okay, but this year there hasn't been any of that. There hasn't been the pressure of exams. There hasn't been that struggle around comprehension of questions. Yet there is still this significant gap. So reflect on that and really begin to think about what that means for your curriculum. So I think there was something positive for me about the performance of children in Hampshire this year, as reported to us by schools. The other bit that I've just got an eye on is with this improvement is really about what's happening to children kind of post 16 as they have now got on to. There are children now who are taking A-level courses who maybe if they're taking exams last year wouldn't be on those A-level courses. You know, what actually is happening? Because it, for me, is actually all about what children have learnt. It's not so much about the grade. If you've got children who have missed a term and are now on A-level courses, are we picking up that lack of a term's knowledge is actually an impediment to them performing at A-level? And I'm particularly looking at this year 11 cohort who have had a very disrupted year 10, and they've got a very disrupted year 11, and them too moving on to kind of A-level post 16 courses. There will be significant amounts of learning that they will not have, and we would not want that being an impediment. We would not want A-level teachers kind of, you know, continuing on teaching A-level in the way that they always have done, without kind of taking account of those particular gaps. So we have got a particular kind of very close scrutiny at the moment on trying to see if more children are kind of dropping out at post 16. That's not manifesting itself at this stage. I know people who have been working with post 16 colleges, and it is a very different relationship between the local authority and post 16 colleges than it is between the local authority and schools. But people who are engaged with them have been talking to principals and vice principals about this sort of area, to kind of alert people to the fact that the current year 12 will not be the same as previous year 12s. So I think that's the summary. That what we found is that there's some good news for disadvantaged children kind of initially in terms of GCSE. We're hoping that children who are in post 16 are able to continue with their courses and we don't get a dropout rate. We're watching that kind of carefully. There's a sense of some questions for schools to really consider, particularly now given that we're into another round of there will be no GCSEs this year. The difference is we are anticipating that what there will be is actually the examination boards will be able to set up greater kind of moderation, and there's a sense of being able to use some kind of testing elements as a way of moderating teacher assessments and building in a greater sense of reliability. So that's my bit around attainment this year. I don't know if there are any kind of questions or any areas that people would like me to elaborate on.
Thank you very much. Our first member is Councillor Brooks.
Sorry, did you say me? Yeah, I'm getting bad feedback.
I was as well. David, would you mind just muting while Celia asks her question? I think that should solve it. Try again, Celia.
How's that? Is that better? Oh yeah, that is better. It was just talking about the disadvantaged children, and you were just saying about it's not about it's all about the learning, not the grades. So these 11-year-old cohorts in the future will be going off to find work and looking for employment. How are we going to educate the employers that that these are children who haven't had their grades will be have the grades that they need to have to apply for the jobs? How are we going to educate the employers to say that we take the children as we see them before us? I hope that makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah, so, the DfE have announced a £1 billion catch-up fund for schools. But basically, the DfE have put money into schools to support the catch-up of children who are in school who've been affected by this, and there are a couple of significant national programs. There is a thing called the National Tutoring Programme, where the DfE have worked with the Education Endowment Fund to provide tutors, particularly to be targeted at supporting disadvantaged children to help them catch up, and a lot of that work is kind of done online, and we've got a number of schools in Hampshire engaging with that. They've also announced a thing called the National Mentoring Programme, which is run by an organisation called Teach First, where they are sending in graduates to mentor, again, particularly disadvantaged children in schools, to support them in helping them catch up. And schools have got an additional sum of money to really think through carefully about how they need to be working with children who've got these significant gaps. And a theme of today has really been the way in which schools have been engaging with online learning and using online learning as a way of really helping to accelerate children's progress. The great thing about online learning is it's online. You're not bound by having to have 30 children in a room with one person. There are all sorts of different ways of organising groupings and teachers in a way that you just can't do in a school building. So there's been a significant programme and that schools are engaging with around catching up the children who are currently within schools. In terms of post-16, again, I know that principals and vice principals have been thinking really carefully about the steps that they have to put in to solve that issue. I've got a granddaughter at the moment who's kind of working her way through college, and the college have put in kind of significant kind of catch-up elements to ensure that that any gaps in her knowledge don't kind of cause a real problem in terms of A-level study.
Thank you.
Councillor Jackie Porter.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And I agree, it's important that we do mark this year by a report. In years to come, we'll be looking through them year on year, and it'll be important. My question relates, in fact, back to Brian's comment earlier on, which was that children's learning environment is also important, as well as what they're actually faced with and what they're taught with. And so I wondered if any research is being done by the county on the impact of their learning environment at home to their ability to take on board the learning that is being taught to them, or the teaching that's being given to them. I'm thinking about, I know families where there isn't a table for them to work on, there isn't a chair at their own height, that sort of thing. So the IT is one aspect, but the learning environment is another. And when on television, you too frequently see cute pictures of 3 children sitting around a table at once, but you can't actually learn like that. So I wondered, is there any research being done by your team about this that might inform how the next year goes on, or possibly longer than that?
Can I jump in on that one, David? So thankfully, because there are no Ofsted inspections of schools and there are no Ofsted inspections of local authorities, there are an awful lot of local Ofsted inspectors with little to do at the moment. So one of the key bits of work they are now engaged in is some research into the effects of remote education. They've produced their first paper, which told us some interesting things last week, but that this is the area of work that Ofsted have jumped into, Jackie, to try and get a national perspective on this, and I think it'll be helpful when they publish further reports. At an individual institution level, I have to say, heads are working really closely with parents, and when they're made aware of barriers, and then doing all they can to try and remove those barriers.
And just to come in on the back of that, we did do a significant survey at the end of last lockdown with schools in terms of online learning and what were kind of significant successes, and the thing that came through to me quite clearly was in a number of schools, heads were really on top of that. And we're really engaging, carefully and closely with parents. One of the bits that came through in terms of a learning point for this lockdown for schools was that it's not just about providing remote learning. The key thing actually is engaging with parents through this process and understanding some of the challenges that their children are having, because the school can then work to address those.
Ros, chat. Did you want to come in? I thought you had your hand up, but it's disappeared. So just want to check if you wanted to come in at that point.
Thank you, Councillor North. I just wanted to actually take the opportunity just to really acknowledge the hard work that all of our schools and colleges have done over this time, and to thank David for a really thorough report on this. And it is so important that we do acknowledge the last year for those students that have been involved in that. But thank you for letting me have my little say. Thank you.
No problem at all. Councillor Anne Briggs, please.
Thank you, Chairman. David, I'm going to follow on from Councillor Brooks, but at the other end of the scale, because some children have done well through this, and amazingly, some were quite looking forward to doing their GCSEs and A-levels. So with the way the marking's going, how will it affect them in future in going to university and jobs? Because like in my day, you've got an O-level and your grade, but how's this going to affect them, this marking?
And I think, I keep coming back to it. For me, it is all about the learning, and so children going on to university, the whole bit around kind of entrance to university part, it isn't just kind of predicated on the grade that you get alone. Generally there is some kind of form of interview that goes on, and it's about testing out pupils' understanding through that interview. That's going to be really important. And And I don't think we're going to have a scenario where people are just, if you like, there's going to be, I don't know, a COVID generation or things like that, because it is going to be about the learning that people can kind of demonstrate. And I think it is the bit about teachers and lecturers now being aware of there is some catch up that needs to go on, and helping children do that. I've talked about my kind of granddaughter's experience. It is live in colleges. It is live in schools at the moment.
Brian, do you want to come in? You're just on mute, sorry.
I'm on the first today, have I won? Sorry about that. Two key points from me. The first one is, if employers only look at grades, these children will be advantaged, because what happened in 2020 was they've got higher grades than any of their previous cohorts, so higher than 2019, higher than 2018. What we've seen is grade inflation. So if they only go on grades, actually this generation will actually be advantaged. The bit I would say, and I think the bit that's really important, is those children that were in year 11 and wanted to go on to college, the Hampshire colleges were brilliant at reaching down and making sure those students got a place on their preferred courses, and have been brilliant over this first term in trying to bring them in and to try and make sure that they got the right induction to enable them to succeed. Similarly, I spoke to most of the college principals across Hampshire in the summer. The universities were also reaching down to this generation. So even if children didn't get the A levels they were thought they might have got, the universities were accepting them and taking them on board. So there was many more children as a proportion went on to university because of that reaching down. So the colleges and unis, I think, have done their best to try and mitigate some of the worst extents, but their grades actually are higher.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Edgar.
Thank you. First of all, it's good to hear Ros Chad leading the way to what's been saying today. And thanks, Ros, for their tremendous support. I know that's come down and continue with education. What puzzles me a little bit is there's greatest challenge ever for teachers and schools. And so much today that you've put together is logical. It's a challenge we've never had in this time. But then right in the middle came a rotten word. It said Ofsted. Because my life has been trying to get Ofsted to work, which is many things go very well and it works well, but it also destroys enthusiasm at times. Will you just tell me, you people at the county, that we will get enthusiasm as the lead in everything we do that will achieve? You won't achieve anything with a young child if you put something so complex and difficult and awkward put together by Ofsted and then it doesn't work. I have to say many of things that Ofsted do is excellent, but the most dangerous thing is we might be too clever about it. So I look forward to seeing Ofsted, the thing they're bringing forward at the moment. But just last point, to thanks everybody at the educators at the county. I think you're doing a great job in a massive challenge.
Thank you, and I always look forward to Ofsted being helpful, and I'm waiting for that day. I'm not going to hold my breath. I'm waiting for that day.
Thank you. Councillor Powell-Hare.
Thank you, Chair. I want to also say thank you to the schools, teachers, staff, parents, students, everyone. You know, it's been a challenging times, and everybody's doing their best to to get the best out of everything. My concern is with the remote learning, children from disadvantaged families are they having their remote learning tailored to their needs? And also, have all the families got enough laptops? Again, like, or iPads, should I say? Because children, and also with children, like Jackie just said, with families with 3 children, different ages, is a lot of pressure on the parents. How has that been monitored?
Thank you. So I'll take those kind of questions as in an order. So in terms of laptops, there has been through the first lockdown, there was a significant government initiative to ensure that as many disadvantaged children as possible could receive a laptop, and certainly across Hampshire, that has been a really significant programme. We to the extent that we have deployed an inspector who's basically got a full-time job at the moment, really working with schools and the DFE to roll that out. The DFE have announced at the beginning of this lockdown too further allocation of laptops, and the number is in the thousands. And I know schools too have themselves done everything they can to ensure that children have kind of got not just laptops, but also the connectivity that they need. And there are I think there are about 3 national schemes to help children get the connectivity. And it's to kind of go back to one of my previous points, it's something schools are highly aware of, that there is a real kind of theme through this lockdown of it just would not be morally right for disadvantaged people to become further disadvantaged as a result of something that is not of their making. So school leaders are on that and are kind of sharply focused on that too. In terms of in terms of what remote learning looks like, I think the conversations that we're having with school, and again, the line kind of coming from the DFE is that it needs to be a blend of work that children do, if you like, kind of offline on their own, as it were, and online teaching. I think we'd be concerned if people just thought that all you need to do is replace a child's timetable with a similar timetable of online activity, direct teaching online. The reports we had from schools which tried to do that through the previous lockdown was that worked for about 2 weeks. And then what happened was that children were beginning to disengage from that really quite heavily, and would just basically kind of sit there with looking like they were engaged, but just not being on top of it. And schools have begun to understand that there are ways of working which are kind of more sophisticated now, which enable them to group together children in ways that you struggle to do in a school. So, for example, some of the best practice that came out of the previous lockdown was where what was happening was schools were combining 2 or 3 classes with 2 or 3 teachers all online, with the teachers providing a 10-minute presentation, and then the class breaking up into much smaller groups to get on with work, which the teachers were then visiting. And on the back of that, the children who were struggling were pulled together into a separate group to get some support directly from the teacher. And the thing that you're able to do is you can get around this kind of big barrier called class size, because what you can do is pull together 5 pupils for 15 minutes in a when you've got a large grouping like that, to have some real kind of in-depth teaching, which people struggle to do in a class of 30. So I think if you talk to heads, I think they're really kind of excited about the way in which they can use online learning now to kind of pair teachers together, to group children, so that the people who struggle can get a bit more kind of targeted support. The pupils who've really got the idea, you can get them applying that into something that you kind of find it hard to do in a kind of four-wall classroom. And I think that in terms of kind of teaching and learning and where schools could go with this and the lessons that they might learn from online learning and remote learning, I think we've already got heads thinking through about how they might use online learning as a resource when lockdown finishes. It is like the world could have changed here in schools as a result of the way that heads are beginning to think about the use of this resource. So the message I get back from schools is generally a positive one and generally one of kind of liberation. So I went into a bit of a rant there because you asked a question that I got too excited about. But so what schools are doing is, yes, they're on this whole thing around children with laptops. Yes, what they're doing is they're using the ability to group children differently to really try and support children who are struggling. But my great proviso on all this is schools are learning this. It's new territory and they're trying things out, and I think they're feeling liberated as a result.
Sorry, Chair, may I just come back and just ask if other schools listening to parents? I'm sure they are, but the parents, are they sort of sending feedback, and what are the schools doing about that?
One of the key bits we've talked to schools about is the whole communication strategy that you need around remote learning, because it is different. In school, children have a timetable, and basically, if all they need to do is follow their friends around, and they generally end up in the right place at the right time with the right teacher, and it's very clear that children are engaging, and what schools have got to do is to somehow replace that in the kind of online domain, that you need to be communicating very clearly to parents what it is you're expecting the child to be doing over the course of this week, because it won't be as straightforward as following the normal school timetable. So that link with communicating with parents is well, it's always important, but it's got a heightened importance in lockdown. And yeah, so we're very clear with schools that you need to have a real strategy around that.
Thank you. Councillor Malcolm Wade, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, David, thanks for that report. A couple of points really. On a generalistic point, the business about unconscious bias and grading, really we need a national process, because exams can't be taken in this current environment, and they weren't last year and they're not this year. Who knows, we might get in this situation again. So there needs to be a process driven way of giving young people the attainment of their educational abilities going forward. But the other comment I want to make really is about laptops. In my division, there are 7 schools plus one very special school, and I do not have enough for disadvantaged families. And to the extent that myself and some other local councils look at using community grants to help support some of this, because clearly we're not providing, and not generic we are not providing enough to support all the disadvantaged families and disadvantaged children that there are, and we need to do that, because their situation as a go will just get worse. Thank you.
If I jump in, David, on the laptops bit, Malcolm, if you've got schools that are struggling on that, can you send me the details, please? Because I had one such email from a councillor earlier on in the week that told me a secondary school was struggling, and when we checked it out, they'd failed to they'd missed the communication from the DFE asking them to submit a further request for more laptops. So something sometimes gets lost in the comms. So if you let me know, we will work with the individual schools to make sure they're maximising their allocation from the DFE.
I will do that, but also just as an added addition to that, we don't really do enough to help primary children either. And I know they don't apply for or get the ability to have laptops and other devices, but very many of them need support too, especially some of the disadvantaged families that can't then take place for any virtual learning that they can take.
So the DFE scheme on the laptops applied to junior age children as well. So both junior schools and primary schools with Key Stage 2 students should have had significant allocations, Malcolm. And again, if you've got primary schools with those bits, please let me know. You are absolutely correct that they didn't target Key Stage 1, but I think there's something in the pedagogy of teaching 4, 5, 6-year-olds that might suggest that doing learning through a laptop probably isn't the best way of getting them to learn anyway, particularly in the early years where, you know, it's purposeful play that we're trying to get them to kind of engage with rather than online stream time.
Okay, thank you. I will let you know, Brian.
Thank you.
And just to reassure you around what's technical moderation process, exam boards are kind of highly efficient, highly skilled at running those sorts of processes. You know, and in the past there have been GCSEs which have been based on 100% coursework, and so setting up those kind of local, district, national networks to do that. Exam boards are skilled at doing that. And I'm anticipating that when we hear from Ofqual their proposals for the GCSE arrangements this year, that that there will now be time to build in moderation processes into you know, across the country into the awarding of grades this year. Last year it was the fact that the exams were cancelled overnight. And schools were shut overnight. That I think meant, you know, exam boards just didn't have that kind of capacity to be able to do that. I think we're going to be in different territory this year.
Good, thank you.
Councillor Fran Carpenter, please.
Yeah, question for David. Thank you, David. Very interesting today. How are teachers, I'm just curious, and how is the authority dealing with online and other truancy at this time? So if somebody's not turning up repeatedly, because there are truancy procedures, aren't there? I just wondered how that's being dealt with. I was also going to ask about, you know, behaviour and disengagement, you know, whether that comes into it. It must do, because children don't change overnight, especially when they're at home, because their behaviour can be very different at home compared to school. So I'm just curious, really. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a whole set of interesting issues, I think, around in engagement. It's really easy when people are in front of you to see whether they're engaging or not. It's a lot harder online. And some heads have reported back that there are some teachers who've enjoyed teaching online because they've been able to adopt a very presentational approach to teaching, and basically they're not now aware of children who don't like a presentational approach to teaching. I'm not going to say maths teachers, but heads have been reporting maths teachers have been really enjoying online teaching because they're able to say, this is what you do, go and get on with it, and they're not having to deal with some of the behaviour issues that they might normally have dealt with. So there are issues around engagement, and I think partly that's why schools have seen that just directly taking lessons and putting them online is not the right approach to helping children learn. What you have to do is think about different ways of grouping, and particularly if you're able to get into a more kind of tutorial situation where you have got 4 or 5 pupils that you're dealing with, you're able to engage with them much more easily in that sort of circumstances online. I mean, you know, when I was a teacher, we had a thing which we used to talk about working the room, where you'd get round and you'd be talking to children and keeping that going all the time. The real route through to making sure all children are engaged is the kind of remote learning version of you know, working the room. It's pulling people together into smaller groups and engaging with them in that way. I mean, the other bit to it as well is some schools are beginning to think about, schools with sort of rewards policy, are they beginning to think about how we take the rewards policy online? So what should that look like? How can we reward children for their engagement as a kind of positive force? Because that enables us then to feed back to parents in a positive way, and you begin to build that virtuous circle. So I think there's something about you know how you actually physically do it, and I think there's a bit about how schools kind of come up with their online teaching policy, if you like, to reward that. And I think it is the bit too where schools you're actually able to take a register much more easily online because you can do that automatically, just in terms of who's logged in, and you know, children who repeatedly have not logged in, you can start pursuing that with their parents too. So I think there are kind of 3 key elements to how schools are working to ensure that they're pulling all the kids in that they should.
Thank you, David. Councillor Bill Withers.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to congratulate everybody today on your presentation, but also to say, with regards to laptops, I know the hard work that your organisation is doing and your teams are doing, and what Ros is doing in particular. And it's not just a simple thing that what the county's doing, it's what the boroughs and districts are working with you, and also the local charities. And I won't name a few of them because obviously they'll be inundated with calls, but there's a lot going on to assist with getting IT support to the vulnerable people and deprived people. And a lot of time is being spent in other organisations passing over equipment to get them serviceable to meet the needs. And I think we all need to realise that within our own areas, there are charities and organisations that could be contacted to assist the county and the boroughs in meeting the school needs. Also on that factor, I think the great thing that's come out of this is that the county has been working with the schools and prioritising their needs, and not just looking after one, but spreading the load quite evenly to ensure that the needs are met. And I'll give you 10 out of 10 for that, because no one can come back and say that you haven't studied and looked at the situation and met all types of needs. So many congratulations.
Thank you for that. It has been it has been a challenging time, and the thing I would just underline is I know how appreciative head teachers have been of the support from a whole host of people and organisations in terms of particularly helping getting kit to people who really need it, my kind of little strapline about what we don't want are people being further disadvantaged as a result of COVID is really kind of a key driving thing in schools at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Ros Chad, sorry, I just noticed your hand. Did you want to come in on that point? Potentially not, so.
Sorry.
Oh.
Sorry. Thank you, Councillor North, sorry about that. One of the pleasures of home learning that was as well. But as a parent who has currently got her 2 older children at home that are in the process of remote learning, I have to just wanted the opportunity to reassure members that actually this time round it feels so much more effortless for me as a parent compared to the last time where it was a very almost a short sharp shock for everybody in what we had to had to be delivered. You've all spoken about discipline. There is a significant amount of discipline within those lessons. If I think of my own children, they have to have their cameras off, they have to be on mute, the chat can only be used for work purposes, which is actually really, really good and really reassuring for me as a parent, because it means that I know that they are, they're safe in that forum. I know I can be doing this, and they're downstairs learning and all that, all throughout this. The experience of a mix of live lessons and then lessons that are emailed through as well, or done on, many of the children have apps now for the school that they have homework put on there, and it actually feels like a really pleasant balance this time. Also, the availability of teachers as well has been fantastic. It's if the children need help with anything, they just have to message their teachers and they're there. And I've spoken to other parents across Hampshire, and I know that's also what they're experiencing as well. It really has been an effortless experience as a parent, and again, speaking to other parents, that's how it seems to be across the board. So I just really wanted to reassure parents that our schools have really done an amazing job with getting this all up and running, and they've had amazing support from Brian and his team, with David, Jean, and with Eric as well, and it feels so much more comfortable this time than it did before. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to reassure members as a parent that parents are well supported, the communication is good with schools, and it feels in a good place for parents and for the children.
Thank you, Councillor Chad. Councillor, before I take Councillor Porter's second question, which will be our last question, Councillor Jackie Branson's just snuck in there, so I'll take yours next, please.
I just really wanted to reiterate what Councillor Chad was saying. I was involved with my granddaughter's remote. I was trying to do it remote learning even, and I mean she's only 5, but the actual what the school had given her to do was good. It was fun, and it was easy to follow for the parents. So I was really impressed by that. Can I just make a slight problem? I think what Councillor Withers was saying about getting schools laptops. Please don't sort of supply schools, at least the school I'm involved with as a governor, does not want, other people's casts off, because the work involved in dealing with it would be too much, and, it's really not appropriate, and it might not even be up to date enough and everything. So, please, we really do want new stuff, and not other people's, as I said. They're not doing them a favour by giving them that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. And can we go to Jackie Porter then, please?
Thank you. And mine's not specifically a question, so perhaps this starts debate. I think the point that's just been made actually is really relevant. As a governor, so my role as a governor is about monitoring the delivery of those, the delivery of teaching in schools, teaching and learning in schools, and making sure that the school is well supported to do that. And I have to say, the head teacher of the one I'm a governor of, has been overwhelmed by the really positive experiences that have been described to them in the way, in fact, in which Councillor Chad's just described it, that everybody says this time it feels effortless because they practiced last term and they knew that they predicted this was coming. So there was a level of practice, and there's also a very clear level of child safeguarding in all of this, which is a key matter for us as well. The other challenge is, of course, the varying number of children that come in every day. So it can be 130 one day, it can be 160 the next. And I think that that's another challenge for the school meal service as well as for the children themselves and the teaching staff. But as a governor, I think it's something that perhaps we might reflect on in governor services later, and how we can talk about what lessons we've all learned as governors and how to strengthen those governing bodies that felt not quite so well supported this time.
No, thank you. And I just to kind of come in on the back of that comment, I know schools did a lot of thinking for the summer because everybody was fearful of a second kind of lockdown. So there was a lot of thought given to online learning. Secondary schools, I know, gave a lot of thought to, so what happens if we get to another lockdown with year 11? And where do we go with grades and things like that? So this lockdown has been, there are issues, but it has been smoother because people have had the chance to have plan B as it were. And I think at the end of all this, that there are some really interesting points of reflection that schools and government services and HIAS and all sorts of people can just consider, because it's forced us to do things differently. And I think what we found is some of the ways of doing things differently have had advantages, and we don't want to lose that.
Thank you, David.
But thank you to the team.
I think, members, we've had a really good discussion and lots of great questions, and it's been clear that we've had a lot of thanks expressed. So perhaps we, as a committee, could additionally add our thanks formally and extend the recommendation just to thank all schools and colleges for their work during this pandemic, because we've all chipped in with some thanks. So perhaps it would be nice if we could just have that formally added on.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder for that, please? Yeah, Councillor Branson.
So can I take a verbal agreement or show of hands on the recommendation that we note the contents and we thank schools and colleges for their work?
Very much so, Chairman. Agreed.
Agreed.
That's
Everyone
great.
Agreed with the additional recommendation and for noting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we will move to item 9, our Ethnic Minority and Traveller Achievement Service update, pages 117 and 142 in your agenda pack, members. I believe we've got Michelle Nye talking us through this presentation.
Yes, I hope you can see my screen.
We can. You're quite quiet though, Michelle.
Okay, I'll put up the volume and speak closer to my hybrid, but please do say if you can't hear me. So thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. Just really the key points about our service this presentation aims to take you through. So the main aims of our service are about promoting inclusion and support for progress and attainment for children and young people from Black and minority ethnic groups, Gypsy, Roma, Traveller, and also those children who are English as an additional language. So we provide bilingual assessment and support to 25 languages for children new to English, and that is on a referral basis from schools. We also work very closely with schools by providing pupil conferencing with specialist teachers. We provide advice around SEND and EAL if those children are in need of additional support and it's not EAL needs, and we'll provide assessments there. We also are working closely with the virtual school around the unaccompanied asylum seekers in order to look at strengthening the work around early profiling and recommendations given to those young people and the schools. We provide a comprehensive service to support Gypsy, Roma and Traveller children to improve the access, engagement and participation of those children and young people. We also provide support to schools to deliver the Young Interpreter Scheme and New Arrival Ambassador Scheme. The Young Interpreter Scheme is one of our sort of real pilot projects that has gone, not pilot anymore, but has been digitalised and is sold not only within the UK, but worldwide as well. So something that we're really proud of within the service. We also offer a number of resources to schools, including books, dictionaries and dual language materials and persona dolls, in order to make sure we can support children and young people from who speak other languages to feel included and also share those with their peers. We also provide a number of advice, support and training to head teachers, support staff, and particularly during this time of COVID, we have taken many calls from schools. In terms of population data, in terms of ethnicity, there's 14.2 children from Black minority ethnic groups from the school census, which was last spring. This is an increase of 0.7% from the previous year, and as you can see, group as well, whereas any other mixed background mainly consists of English speakers. In terms of language, so these are the English as an additional language speakers, 6.6% of pupils speak English as an additional language within our schools. This is 3 percentage points more than in 2019 and 500 more children. In terms of our new arrival data, so those are the schools that make referrals to us, we received 502 referrals between the academic year 2019-20, speaking 52 different languages. Now, as I said, we only support 25 languages. However, our staff are well trained in order to support children of those other languages, using particular strategies, using online resources as well, in order to make sure we can fulfil their need and support the schools. If we do struggle, we will use interpreters, particularly around the engagement with parents. In terms of new arrivals, the highest number of referrals are from the Rushmore area, followed by Basingstoke and the Tess Valley. And the Year R children do make up most referrals from schools. The work that tends to happen in Year R is not so much supporting the individual child, as really we want them to be following the curriculum in terms of play-based learning. It's more to do with parental engagement and making sure that we can support the parents to support their children in school. We do work closely with the services for young children and have translated guides to prepare for parents to prepare their children in school as well, which is really helpful, and on our website. In terms of the spring census, there are 160 languages recorded on the census. So just to be aware, the linguistic diversity throughout Hampshire is very large. Polish is the most spoken language, followed by Nepali, but Romanian speakers have increased quite considerably over the last 3 years. Whereas the Nepali and Polish communities have established communities in the Northants and Basingstoke areas, the Romanian speakers tend to be across Hampshire, so actually there's no particular geographical area we've noticed that those families have settled. Following on really from what David was saying just a moment ago, during 2018-19, we did see an improvement picture in relation to educational outcomes, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we were not able to get data about the ethnic minority groups, but the assumption is we would hope that they would continue to be doing well. We do know, however, there are particular groups like the Gypsy Roma Traveller that may not achieve as well as others, and that's why they're a focus within our team. I just wanted to draw your attention to GCSE results from 2018-19, which are the Heritage Language GCSEs, and how our service actually supported 48 students during this time to achieve their Heritage Language GCSE in 9 different languages, which are listed there. And we had great success of 100% students either achieving an A star to C, as that was the grading at the time, or a 9 to 4, depending on which exam board they used. During COVID, we had to adapt, as everyone did, at quite short notice in terms of our work with schools. So we supported, during the first lockdown, just under 500 requests from schools and parents virtually. And this ranged really in terms of contacting parents to check well-being on behalf of the school, discussions with parents about how to support the learning of their children in first language, some supports with transition in terms of school places, making sure the applications were in and what the parents needed to do. We also did some interpreting and small translations where requested. So we worked very flexibly during that time. We also delivered direct bilingual support to children and young people virtually in July when schools returned, and we could work with them closely and in terms of with safeguarding as well, those children to provide additional support online. We also have many new resources that are shared on our Moodle to support parents, lots of free resources in different languages that were shared. Following a suggestion from a school, we developed a translation app which was about school community keeping safe that can be used in different languages with just some key phrases that schools might use to send out to parents as well. There was also a COVID flowchart that was translated in Nepali for parents to make appropriate decisions about whether they should send their children to school or not if they had developed symptoms. Obviously the answer is no, but it was actually just making sure that parents were aware of how to make those clear decisions. And that was from Cherrywood Community School, which is one of our Gold EAL Excellence Award schools, in keeping with the parents and community aspect. We also developed, as many services have, a thorough risk assessment, and once we could resume visiting in September, we visited in line with COVID guidelines. Referrals to MTAS are slightly above this time last year, and we are continuing to support those children also referred before the last lockdown, so staff at the moment are very busy. And as we enter into our third lockdown, our staff are adapting again and supporting schools in a similar way, but with addition this time to joining online lessons, which is what we've just been speaking about, and joining lessons to support children bilingually using the schools network, and also explaining to parents about logging on if they need additional support. So we are still getting lots of work with schools at the moment and with children carrying on. In terms of our work against priorities, our e-learning CPD continues to be developed. It's highly valued and also being used in initial teacher training. It's not a substitute for face-to-face work, but during lockdown we also saw an increased use of the e-learning CPD for staff. We continue to increase the sold service work through additional hours and selling many resources. As I mentioned, young interpreters not only in the UK but globally. Our new EAL Excellence Award is also being sold nationally as well, and other authorities have a lot of interest in that. This work has obviously been impacted by COVID. We continue with project work and using data to target particular groups and support working with schools. We're working on a dual storytelling project at the moment, engaging children and parents, developing and co-writing materials. But again, because of COVID, that's been impacted at the moment, but the planning is in place for that to continue. Assessing curriculum through first language is a strong focus of our service this year, and using first language as a key approach in order to support children's learning in the classroom. These principles actually have been really supportive during this time, as support since September, majority of it has had to be outside of the classroom, so these are strategies that we have been using even more. The EAL and GRT Excellence Award are both progressing. These are online sort of SEF, school evaluation forms, and they are accredited. And at the moment we have 15 schools at the bronze level, 6 at silver and 1 at gold. and it's really good in terms of practice to see what's going on in these schools. We are still supporting traveller transition, making sure we're engaging with the schools and families, making sure they have school places during this time going forward, as we know that sometimes travellers may opt for elective home education at the end of year 6 and not transfer. So we want to make sure we have these conversations with parents early to prevent this. We also have the GRT Reading Ambassador scheme that we've started in a couple of schools, again looking at positive role models of GRT children learning and promoting positivity in that way. Kushti Careers is another GRT initiative, and that is around higher aspirations and positive role models. And at the moment, we currently have 3 people speaking on our website, which they've recorded from their phones: a nurse, a teacher, and musician. So really looking at showing children and parents about high aspirations and importance of education. And lastly, we continue work with the Isle of Wight and our self-service. This is just really our website. If you were to have a look, you can see lots of information there, and if you are working in schools, you can signpost to that, and that's how they make referrals. But on the Moodle pages is where we have much guidance. And lastly, if anyone has any questions.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I appreciate there may have been some technical problems, but members, the slides are in the agenda, so hopefully you could follow on through our ModGov pack as well. I don't have any hands yet, but any questions, members? Councillor Jackie Porter saves the day.
Thank you. It was really interesting, and I really appreciate the presentation, because actually you gave a lot more information than I gleaned from necessarily from the presentation. That's really helpful. The question I was going to ask is about Gypsy Roma Traveller team groups, and also children arriving at preschool and going on to school with a language, English as a second language. And I know that you're helping children in the summer term, or schools to help integrate children in the summer term. In view of the challenge that we're all going through at the moment, is it appropriate to try and do that before the summer term, or are you just waiting until their school's allotted in mid-April?
Yeah, so I was just checking, I wasn't on mute there, so I did. Yeah, so what we're doing, we'll still continue looking at April, because we need to know where those children are being placed in support school. But the offer is there, and we do work very closely with our schools. If they have any questions or concerns, it all equally goes for preschools. Although we're not funded by preschools, you know, we do make sure that we make those connections with preschools and schools as well. So we will try and carry on as much as we possibly can, depending on when we physically return. Some of that may be virtual, but we will just, so I think we could just say try our best during this time to support. But we have been sort of working on this offer to support at an earlier stage, because we do know that that impact of working with the parents and school is important in preparing children, starting particularly if they speak English as an additional language, and if they have arrived, depending on when they have arrived as well, if they haven't actually experienced the English education system before. Those that have siblings, it's sometimes easier, but those that are, as you say, just new arrivals, it's far more difficult. So they're the parents that we do want to make sure we can speak to and support. And we do that at school.
And just in terms of high achievers, I know the police have examples of Gypsy Roma families that have produced children that go on to become policemen, and you might like to include that in your group, because often they see policemen as for a different reason, and it would be really good for them to be able to see it in a positive role model.
No, thank you. And we have got a policewoman, I think, or police lined up actually as well. So, but thank you.
Excellent. That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. I might have some issues with hands showing up on my device, but I have Councillor Ray Bolton next, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Michelle, for your report. Very simple and succinct. Gypsy Romanian traveller children during these lockdown periods, given that they're living in mobile homes and that type of accommodation?
I'm really sorry, you did go a bit quiet at one point and I missed the question, but I think possibly, is it around the learning of children who are living more on remote sites and not in houses?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to just clarify that. Unfortunately, we don't exactly know the difference between, because obviously our work comes from the work with schools, so we know a lot about the Gypsy Roma traveller children from the work that we do within schools. So we have supported schools having those conversations with families. Most of our families, I think, where they are living, and I wouldn't like to say this is for all, but will access access to mobile phones and things. It does depend, as you say, what area they're in. And I think in terms of the government, the vulnerable children at the moment, in terms of classing as vulnerable, if they can't access online learning, they would be potentially those children that would be in school. The difficulty we have there is that some families, particularly like all families, there is that anxiety around COVID at the moment, and the Gypsy Roma traveller community in particular were one of the first groups to remove their children in the first lockdown due to COVID. So there's a lot of anxiety around that, and also if they're living quite closely together to whether they'll send their children to school or not. So I haven't really answered your question because I don't know the exact answer, but I think in terms of what we've said before, where schools know that they're particularly vulnerable, they're ensuring that the children, as far as possible, can get into the school. And as a service, because we do have good relationships with a majority of those families and the schools, we sometimes call on the school's behalf as well and work with the school in order to try and encourage children either to be in school or to support them in terms of what they might need for learning as well.
Yes, that answers my question, I think, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any more hands on my device, but I understand that potentially Councillor Withers has his hand up.
Sorry, Chair, if I can help. We seem to have got some glitches for some reason, but I can see Councillor Withers and Councillor Wade have got their hands up on my screen. So I don't know if that helps you at all.
Yeah, it's not up. Kirsty, it's not up on my machine, so I don't know why that's there.
Okay, no problem.
My apologies.
No, that's okay. It woke me up. No, it didn't.
Thank you for letting us know. Does any other member have a question? If so, just unmute and start asking away. I will take that as everyone is very happy with your presentation. Thank you, Michelle. We'll move to the recommendation then, and that's that the Select Committee note the work of MTAS in supporting children, young people and their families during the COVID-19 pandemic and progress made in addressing the priorities in the service plan. Everyone agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. We'll move to item 10, which is the impact of changes to post-16 transport policy statement 2020 for students attending post-16 provision in the 2020-2021 academic year. It's our 6-month update as requested by this committee in July 2020, and I think Suzanne's just, or Martin Goff actually, or is it Suzanne, Steve? Sorry.
Well, I can take the questions if there are any questions, don't worry.
Right, okay, so we've got the report. It's a very short report on our agenda, members, so if you want to raise your hands if you have questions and we can go through them. Okay, so I have Councillor Jackie Porter, please.
The obvious statement is a lot more children have had their applications rejected as a result of this change in policy. Is there a particular concern that we are missing a group of young people who are not getting to the educational establishments of their choice? I just want to comment on that, please, because I don't think it really, the paper describes the situation but doesn't really give any feeling of whether this is the right decision or not.
Well, of course, and the problem, the unforeseen and impossible to anticipate problem on it was, of course, the COVID dimension to this. So whilst more children have had their application to travel refused, we've actually had more applicants as well. You'll have noted that. The other dimension is to it that people have got travel because we've received an extra grant for post-16 travel anyway. So it's a really, to be honest, it's I find it difficult to draw any conclusions at this stage, if I'm absolutely honest. I can see Martin hovering and with his microphone on, so he may well want to come in on this. So I'll hand over to Martin.
It might not have been the best 6 months to do a comparison.
Yeah, well, yes, that's right.
But I think it is something that we need to be keeping an eye on, because we do, particularly for the children that are coming through as year 9, 10 and 11 now, this might be a real barrier to learning later on, and we just need to make sure we've covered that.
Yeah. Martin, did you want to add to that?
I think the simple analysis that you put forward there, Councillor Porter, is correct. You know, we refused more. The 87 that I've mentioned at the end of November as having appeals, and that just connects to the timetable for producing the paper, most of those do get approved. And the reason for that is when making the application, the parents don't provide us with enough information on which to agree eligibility. And so the group that has been refused is larger than last year, but it's not of the order of 168. It's nearer to 90 or so. That is the difference between 168 and those that appealed. And as Steve has said, it's a growing cohort. Steve's slide from earlier referred to the increase in EHCPs. The group of students that I've been working with, because I provide transport for them, hasn't grown quite as much as what that presents with, because there was a group of students who had what were called Section 139As or 139 assessments that were the equivalent of the education, health and care plans for post-16s. And so some of the growth in EHCPs is this transfer of the S139As. But we are seeing a growth, and it's a combination of the post-19 students who roll forward and stay in the system, and this increasing number of EHCPs. And so it is quite a difficult time to provide that analysis. This year to last year is difficult for looking for trends, and actually it almost needs a couple more years to become a stable 16 to 25 phase for me to really be able to talk to it in the way that I would like to, Councillor Porter, with that real detail that you're used to in terms of analysing trend and being certain of what's happening.
Thank you. I think this committee could consider that, Councillor North, as a future concern.
Noted.
Thank you.
Any other member wish to ask a question? I can't see any hands, but if you want to unmute, in which case we will move to the recommendation that the Children and Young People Select Committee note the content of our report. Has everyone agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We have item 11 now, our update on autism services commissioning for children and young people in Hampshire. The report is on pages 149 to 153 in your agenda pack. It's just our written update, and members can ask any questions, which we will then share by email to the commissioning services. But I hope you'll agree with me that it is good news. Councillor Jackie Porter.
Thank you. It's certainly looking better news, isn't it? I think it's really encouraging to see. We want to make sure that delivery actually is as it's promised. So I would like to add the recommendation that we continue to receive these reports until we do get to a 3-month waiting list as is recommended.
I'm certainly comfortable with that they haven't achieved what we asked, and so I would anticipate us still receiving a written update. Yes. But
thank you. It does look a little bit more hopeful, and and we look forward to seeing it when young people do have a relatively quick response to the system, because actually for many of them, as he made very clear at the time, it isn't actually an autism diagnosis, and it may be something else that's underlying that actually needs to be addressed separately. And then I think we have to look at whether the diagnosis brings about an outcome for that young people that isn't just a diagnosis, but working with the family and with the young person to make it, to bring their life up to become a more satisfying one.
Thank you, Jackie. Any other queries can be emailed through to myself, and we can facilitate those questions going to Matt. But could we just verbally note the recommendation? So that's the Children and Young People Select Committee note the update, if we can agree on that.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll move to item 12, which is our work programme, the information item. You've got it in the agenda pack, and there's some, any updates are in red. Just as we were talking about the autism services update, I think it would be appropriate that we receive another presented update from them, and I'd like to suggest that we have that in November this year, 2021. We'll receive our written updates in the meantime, but then we can hear about the progress that they are making, and hopefully they will have some more detail for us around that time. And also to note that at the first Children and Young People Select Committee after the election, we'll have an item providing an overview of an introduction into children's services for potential change of membership of the committee and to start them off going forward. Does anyone else have any suggestions, comments, questions on the work programme? Councillor Jackie Porter.
Thank you. In view of the highly, the well-documented challenge to not just the mental health services, but also the whole of the youth services nationally, I wonder if it's an appropriate time to be looking at the youth services across the county, not just those provided by the county, but those supported by the county and others provided. I have to declare an interest as a trustee of a youth service. I'm not chairman anymore, just a trustee, but it is something that's being documented in the public arena during COVID, and I wonder if it's appropriate to include something in the work programme for that.
Okay, I'm sure we can. Steve, come in.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting topic, and I think explicitly going beyond the local authority services is probably a good idea, because there is a sort of a tapestry of different services. So yeah, I'd be very much in favour of that. Yeah, I've got another point to raise, Chair, in a second, but I'll shut up for now because other people are ahead of me.
Okay, we'll just go to Councillor Jackie Branson next then.
I was just wondering if we wanted a COVID update. Really, the situation of COVID in the school, just a general update of and the whole of children's services. That was all.
Well, yes.
Only a little subject.
hard to plan in when we can put that in at a time where are we looking at it during the pandemic or post-pandemic? But yes, I agree that that's something that will certainly feature. Do you want to come back in, Steve?
Well, it relates to my other sort of query, really. I think that working on the assumption that the election goes ahead in May and that our first select committee is in July, we could it would make sense to weave into our sort of induction session a section on COVID, because that would be about the right timing by then, I should think. So that makes a whole load of sense. I suppose the big if in that sentence was if the elections go ahead in May, and it was in the Times yesterday, so it probably is true that they're looking at November or another date for elections. And I just don't know technically what then happens to the dates of the select committee, and I don't know whether Jackie can advise us on that.
I think at the moment we can only go on the information that we've got to hand currently. So until we hear otherwise, then we can adapt all HCC meetings accordingly and go from that. But at the moment, we're still waiting confirmation of any changes. So, but we will definitely adapt accordingly.
So there may be some flexibility to come, members.
Yeah. If I could say then, what that sort of says is that if in July we're not doing an induction session, the alternative would be to do a COVID update session in that slot instead, if I can suggest that as an alternative.
Yeah.
A sort of either or scenario.
I think that's useful.
Chairman, can I interrupt to say, suggesting that's actually a member briefing rather than a scrutiny item? It feels as if it's something that the whole council should know about. Either that we invite them to this, but one way or another, it's something that the whole council, as we're all corporate parents, we should all be informed about.
It's a fair comment from my perspective. I'll be guided. I don't mind. I have a sense that there's probably an update to happen, and the format I'm neutral on, if you know what I mean. But perhaps can I suggest we leave that just open for the minute until we know a bit more about elections and so forth?
Yeah, Councillor Patricia Stallard, I think.
Yes, thank you very much. I do tend to agree with Councillor Porter on this particular issue. COVID is something for all elected members, no matter whether or not they're on this particular select committee or not. But if you did want to go ahead, Chairman, you could perhaps focus a COVID session on the implications of COVID, on the ongoing implications of COVID for schools and young people.
Yeah, I think
focus
certainly
it, yeah, if you say
enough information and as a meaty enough topic for us to cover it, as well as it to be covered perhaps a bit less specifically in a whole member briefing on COVID for the council. I think our committee quite like to go through the detail on that, so I think there will be enough information, but I'd certainly happy to put forward that could feature as a briefing as well, but I think we'd quite like it to come to committee too. Thank you. Any other points about the work programme? In which case, can we just note the recommendation and agree the work programme?
With the amendments made and discussed at the meeting.
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Chairman.
you very much. In which case, I will request that the webcast is stopped, please.